The scent of salt and baking bread was a lie. It was a beautiful, fragrant curtain I drew every single day, a desperate performance of normalcy for the sake of the two small hearts that were my entire world. In our little whitewashed house, perched on the cliffs of a forgotten Sicilian fishing village, I was just Mama. To Sophia, with her solemn dark eyes that saw too much, and to Marco, a burst of sunshine with a laugh that could mend any crack in my soul. They were 5 years old, my miracles, my reason for breathing, and they were the most dangerous secret on the entire island. My name is Chiara. Once, it was Chiara Rossi, the only daughter of Don Vittorio Rossi, the most feared man in Naples. That girl died 5 years ago. The night I crept down to my father's study for a forgotten book and became a ghost in my own home, listening in frozen horror as he and my brother, Enzo, planned the cold-blooded execution of Lorenzo Conti. It wasn't the target that shattered me. Lorenzo Conti was a rival, a monster in his own right, they said. It was the casual mention of his mother, who would be in the car, regrettable but necessary collateral. I had seen Signora Conti once, at a funeral, a regal woman with sad eyes, holding a rosary. In that moment, she wasn't the wife of a Don. She was just a mother, and I was a daughter who could not let another mother be slaughtered to send a message. So, I killed Chiara Rossi. I took a car, a stack of cash from the safe, my passport, and vanished into the night. I drove until the money and my nerve ran out, finding this remote village where the world felt centuries behind. A month later, the nausea started. The doctor confirmed it with a smile. Twins. The result of a single, reckless night with a boy from the city, a final act of rebellion before my life closed in. That boy was long gone. These children became my entire universe. Their existence was a secret buried within a secret. If my family found me, my betrayal was a death sentence, and my children would be taken, molded into new weapons for the Rossi Empire. If the Conti family found me, we would all be slaughtered for the name I carried. So, I became a ghost. I worked in the local cannery, my hands raw from salt and fish, and I taught my children that mama was a word for home, for whispered lullabies in the Italian of my own childhood. Outside, we were quiet, we were careful, we were no one. The bell above the door of the tiny grocery shop jangled, a sound that usually meant old Signor Alfio coming for his gossip and his wine. But the air changed, growing thin and sharp as a blade. I looked up from stacking tins of olives, my blood turning to ice in my veins. 2 men stood inside the door. They were not from here. Their shoes were too polished, their suits too fine for the dusty streets, their stillness that of predators who had found their quarry. I dropped the tin I was holding. It hit the stone floor with a crash that seemed to shake the very foundations of my fragile world. The younger one, with a face like a cruel angel, glanced at me. The older one, his features a roadmap of old violence, was staring past me, out the shop's fly-specked window that looked onto the small piazza. My piazza. While Sophia and Marco were playing tag, their joyful shrieks carried on the sea breeze under the widow's watchful eye, and I paid with fresh fish. "Posso aiutarla?" I asked, my voice a dry rustle. "Can I help you?" The older man ignored me. He was staring out the window, his head cocked, listening. I followed his gaze, my heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. The window was open a crack, and on the air, clear as a bell, came my daughter's voice, ringing with laughter and love in perfect musical Italian. "Mamma, guarda! Marco sta barando! Mamma, look!" Marco is cheating. The world stopped. The air was sucked from my lungs. I saw the man's spine straighten, his entire body going rigid with the force of his understanding. He knew the language. He knew the language. He knew the weight of that word. He knew that the woman with the Rossi eyes, standing before him in a faded dress, was a mother. He slowly, so slowly, turned his head from the window. His eyes, a pale, chilling green, locked onto mine. In their depths, I saw the past 5 years of running, of hiding, of fear, all crumbling to dust. His lips parted. He didn't speak to me. He spoke to his companion, his voice a low, deadly whisper that cut through the quiet shop. Prendi I bambini, get the children. The words were a death knell. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to scream until my lungs burst. But I was frozen, a rabbit in the gaze of a wolf. The younger man nodded and turned toward the door. No. The thought was a detonation. It shattered the paralysis. My children. I would burn the world for them. I would die for them. I lunged. Not for the door, but for the shelf behind the counter, my fingers closing around the heavy, ceramic mortar Señor Alfio used to crush garlic. I didn't think. I hurled it with all my strength. It missed the man's head by inches, exploding against the door jamb in a cloud of white dust and shards. But it stopped him. It bought me a single, precious second. I didn't wait. I ran. I burst out of the shop, my vision tunneling on the piazza, on my children. Sofia, Marco, correre, adesso, I screamed. Run, now! Their small faces, flushed with play, turned to me, confusion, then fear, as they saw the terror contorting my features. I was halfway across the sun-baked stones when a black sedan, sleek and silent as a shark, pulled up to the curb, blocking my path. The rear door opened, and the man who stepped out made the two in the shop look like mere foot soldiers. He was taller, his shoulders broader, his presence an avalanche of absolute, controlled power. He wore a simple black shirt and trousers, but they did nothing to disguise the lethal grace in his stance. His hair was dark, his jaw cut from stone, and his eyes were the color of a storm-racked sea, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. Lorenzo Conti. The man whose death my family had planned. The man I had saved. The man who now stood between me and my children. Our eyes met across 10 feet of ancient cobblestones. In his, I saw a cataclysm shock, a flicker of impossible recognition, and then a cold, hardening fury that promised annihilation. He had heard. He had heard my daughter call me Mama. He knew who I was, and he knew what I had. His gaze swept from my terrified face to the 2 small children now clinging to my legs, their little bodies trembling. He took a single, deliberate step forward. The world held its breath. I had hidden them for 5 long years, and in one sun-drenched, terrible moment, the walls I had built with blood and fear came crashing down. Time didn't just slow, it shattered, each fragment a sharp, glittering shard of terror. The cheerful chaos of the piazza, the squawking gulls, the distant hum of a fishing boat, the shouts of other children muffled into a dull, faraway roar. There was only him, Lorenzo Conti, a living statue of vengeance. His stormy gaze was a physical weight pinning me to the cobblestones, where my knees threatened to buckle. My mind, a frantic animal, scrambled for a weapon, a lie, a miracle. There was nothing. I was trapped. His eyes, that tempestuous gray, swept over me, from my wind-tangled hair to the children clutching my legs, then back to my face. I could see the brutal arithmetic happening behind them. Chiara Rossi, the traitor, alive, with children. His enemy's bloodline hidden in this forgotten place. Take them to the car, he commanded, his voice a low, resonant roll of thunder that brooked no argument. He didn't specify who. He didn't need to. The 2 men from the shop were already moving, the older one's hand closing around my upper arm in an iron grip, the younger one reaching for Sofia. No! The scream was torn from a place deeper than my throat, raw and primal. I fought against the hold, my nails scratching uselessly at the man's leathery skin. He was immovable, a mountain. Marco began to wail, a high, terrified sound that shredded my soul. Sofia, my brave, serious Sofia, planted her small feet, her chin trembling, but her eyes blazing with the defiance that was all mine. Lascia stare la mia mamma, she shouted, her small voice ringing with fury. Leave my mama alone. The sound of it, so brave and so small, seemed to vibrate in the charged air. Lorenzo flinched. It was a minute reaction, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. But I saw it. He looked at Sofia, truly looked at her, and for a fleeting, impossible second, the fury in his gaze was joined by something else, something unreadable and complex. Non toccateli, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Please do not touch them. The younger man froze, his hand hovering inches from Sophia's shoulder. Lorenzo's attention returned to me, a laser of cold fire. Verrete con me, tutti. In silenzio. Oh, la situazione diventerà spiacevole per I bambini. You will come with me, all of you. Quietly. Or, this will become unpleasant for the children. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple, chilling forecast. The choice was an illusion. I could go willingly, or my children would be exposed to the violence I had spent my life shielding them from. I looked down at their faces, pale and streaked with tears. My beautiful, innocent babies. I had one card left to play, one desperate, dangerous truth. I met his gaze, my own eyes pleading, my voice a ragged, broken whisper. Lorenzo, per favor, sono solo bambini. Lorenzo, please, they are just children. The use of his name, the desperate plea in our shared tongue, made his eyes narrow to slits. Tu sai chi sono, he stated. You know who I am. Certo ci so ci sei. I said, the words tumbling out in a torrent I could no longer contain. Of course I know who you are. I know, because 5 years ago, I stood in the dark outside my father's study and heard him and my brother plan to put a bullet in your head. I heard them talk about your mother being accettabile ma necessaria. I took a shaky, burning breath. Sono scappata quella notte. Ho rubato una macchina e sono scappata. Non perché fossi una codarda, ma perché non potevo lasciare che mi rendessero complice dell'omicidio di un figlio di fronte a sua madre. I ran that night. I stole a car and I ran. Not because I was a coward, but because I couldn't let them make me complicit in murdering a son in front of his mother. The silence that followed was more profound than any sound. The fury in his eyes faltered, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. He stared at me as if I had just pulled back a curtain to reveal an entirely different universe. The narrative in his head, the Rossi daughter, a venomous snake hiding her brood, was collapsing into dust. Two, he began, but the words seemed to lodge in his throat. You! He took a step closer, his gaze intensifying, scouring my face for the lie. He found only the raw, bleeding truth. Mi hai salvato la vita, I whispered, the words hanging between us like a guillotine blade. You saved my life. E tu sei stata nascosta da allora, he concluded, his voice softer now, laced with a dawning, bewildered understanding. And you have been hiding ever since. His eyes flicked to the children, then back to me, a new, terrifying calculation beginning. Con loro. With them. He didn't ask about the father. The question was a shadow in the storm of his gaze. But the immediate life-and-death crisis took precedence. The decision was made in the space of a single, shared heartbeat. The cold, predatory focus returned, but its target had shifted. We were no longer prey. We were a problem. His problem. Salit and Makaina, he commanded, but the edge of imminent violence was gone from his voice. It was still absolute, the voice of a king, but it was now the voice of a king taking control of a volatile asset. Get in the car. The grip on my arm loosened. The man holding me looked to Lorenzo for confirmation. A sharp, almost imperceptible nod. I didn't fight anymore. The fight was gone, replaced by a numb, chilling clarity. I gathered my children, pulling them tight against me, their small, trusting hands clutching mine. I shepherded them toward the black sedan, my body a fragile shield against the world. Lorenzo held the door open himself. As I bent to usher Sophia inside, our eyes met. The storm in his heart was still there, but the lightning had changed direction. It was no longer aimed at me. It was aimed at the world that had forced a woman to run, to hide, to live in a cage of her own making for 5 long years. I had saved his life. And now, in the most twisted, fateful turn imaginable, he was offering us a different kind of cage. A gilded, impenetrable one. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving my fragile, carefully constructed life in ruins behind me, I held my trembling children close and looked at the man's profile in the front seat. The Mafia boss. The son I had saved. The man who now holds our future in his hands. And I wondered, with a terrifying, burgeoning hope if in saving his life all those years ago I had somehow, irrevocably, saved our own. The car was a tomb on wheels, gliding silently away from the only home my children had ever known. The scent of expensive leather and Lorenzo's cologne, something dark and woody like sandalwood and smoke, filled the space, a stark, oppressive contrast to the familiar smells of salt air and baking bread that clung to our clothes. Sophia and Marco were pressed against me, their small bodies rigid with a fear they couldn't possibly understand. Marco's silent tears soaked into my dress, while Sophia stared, unblinking, at the back of Lorenzo's head, her little hand fisted so tightly in my shirt I could feel her nails through the fabric. He didn't speak. He didn't turn. He stared out the windshield, his profile a sharp, unyielding line against the passing blur of olive groves and crumbling stone walls. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his mind, reassessing every fact, every assumption he'd ever held about the Rossis, about me. The woman he'd been taught to see as his birthright enemy had been his unwitting guardian angel. The drive was not long, but it crossed into another world. We left the sleepy coastal vulnerability behind, the landscape shifting to one of secluded, intimidating grandeur. High, whitewashed walls, topped with terracotta tiles, discreet security cameras, massive, electronically controlled iron gates that swung open without a sound. We were entering his territory, his fortress. The car stopped on a graveled circle before a magnificent villa, a low-slung, sprawling masterpiece of pale stone and dark wood, nestled amidst ancient cypress trees and overlooking the endless, blue Tyrrhenian Sea. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and it felt like the mouth of a dragon. A man opened the door, his face like weathered granite and his eyes holding no warmth. He gave a slight, respectful nod. Don Conti. Lorenzo got out and turned, his stormy gaze finding mine through the open door. Portatelli dentro. Bring them inside. It was an order, flat and final. I climbed out, my legs weak and trembling, holding Marco, my other hand a vice around Sophia's. We were led through a cool, cavernous foyer with a polished, ancient stone floor and into a vast living area. It was furnished with an austere, masculine elegance, low-slung leather sofas, a massive fireplace, and abstract art on the walls. It was stunning, and utterly devoid of life. There were no toys, no stray books, no fingerprints on the glass. It was a stage set, not a home. Allogherite qui, Lorenzo stated, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, quiet space. You will stay here. Questa ala è sicura. Avrete tutto il necessario. This wing is secure. You will have everything you need. He finally let his gaze fall upon the children. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cool assessment. Loro saranno al sicuro qui. They will be safe here. Per quanto tempo? I asked, my voice trembling despite my fierce effort to control it. For how long? Fino a quando deciderò io cosa fare di voi, he replied, his tone brutally, refreshingly honest. Until I decide what to do with you. He was a man who dealt in assets and liabilities. We were both currently a complicated equation he had yet to solve. He turned to leave, but Sophia's small, clear voice, still thick with tears but unwavering, stopped him cold. Sei un uomo cattivo? Are you a bad man? Lorenzo froze mid-stride. He slowly turned back, his gaze lowering to my daughter. He didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be truly, genuinely considering the question from this small, fierce person. Sono un uomo che tiene al sicuro le persone, he said finally, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I am a man who keeps people safe. Tua mamma è al sicuro qui. Tu sei al sicuro qui. Questo è tutto quello che devi sapere. Your mama is safe here. You are safe here. That is all you need to know. He left then, the heavy wooden door closing behind him with a soft, definitive click that sealed our fate. We were alone. The first few hours were a blur of disorientation and bone-deep fear. A woman named Rosa, who had a kind, round face but eyes that held a permanent wariness, brought food simple pasta al pomodoro for the children, which they picked at without appetite. She also brought a stack of new clothes, soft cotton pajamas, and little shirts and shorts, all in their exact sizes. The efficiency of it was chilling. He'd had them sized up and provided for in a matter of hours. As night fell, casting long shadows across the unfamiliar room, I managed to bathe them and get them into the large, intimidating bed we were to share. They clung to each other in their sleep, their breathing finally evening out into the soft, trusting rhythms of childhood. I sat by the window, watching the moon paint a shimmering path on the dark water, my mind a whirlpool of terror and a strange, burgeoning curiosity. The door to the room opened so silently that I didn't hear it. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Lorenzo stood there, silhouetted in the doorway. He had shed his suit jacket, his white shirt open at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked tired, the weight of his world visible in the new lines around his eyes. "Dormono?" he asked quietly. "Are they asleep?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He came further into the room, his steps silent on the thick rug. He didn't look at me. His attention was wholly captured by the children sleeping in the center of the vast bed. He stood there for a long moment, just watching them. The impenetrable mask of the dawn was gone. In its place was an expression of profound, almost painful curiosity. "Quanti anni hanno?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "How old are they?" "Cinque," I whispered. "5. I loro nomi?" "Their names?" "Sofia e Marco." He repeated the names softly, as if testing the weight and shape of them in his mouth. "Sofia. Marco." His gaze lingered on Marco's face, on the dark curls so like my own, then on Sofia's, with her sharp, intelligent features that already hinted at the woman she would become. "Il padre? The father?" The question I had been dreading. I wrapped my arms around myself, a defensive gesture I couldn't suppress. "Non era nessuno. Un ragazzo. È stata una notte. Lui non lo sa. Non lo saprà mai." He was nobody. A boy. It was one night. He doesn't know. He never will. I looked at him, my eyes pleading for him to understand this most fundamental truth. Sono mie. Solo mie. They are mine. Only mine. He absorbed this, his gaze returning to the sleeping children. A long silence stretched between us, filled only by their soft breathing. "Parlano italiano." They speak Italian. La lingua del mio cuore," I said, my voice breaking. "Volevo che la conoscessero. Non ho mai pensato." It's the language of my heart. I wanted them to know it. I never thought, "Non ho mai pensato che sarebbe stata la cosa che si avrebbe tradito." I never thought it would be the thing that gave us away. A ghost of a smile, there and gone in an instant, touched his lips. "Il destino ha un crudele senso dell'ironia." Fate has a cruel sense of irony. He finally turned his full attention to me. The moonlight streaming through the window caught the sharp planes of his face, making him look both more severe and more starkly vulnerable. "Mi hai salvato la vita," he said, the words simple, stark, and heavy with a meaning I was only beginning to grasp. "You saved my life." "Tui I tue bambini avete vissuto nella paura per un atto di misericordia, di cui io non sapevo nulla." You and your children have been living in fear because of an act of mercy I knew nothing about. He took a step closer. The space between us crackled with a new, dangerous energy. "Il debito che ho con te è incalcolabile, Chiara Rossi." The debt I owe you is immeasurable, Chiara Rossi. The use of my full name, my old name, sent a shiver down my spine. It was an acknowledgement of all that I was, and all that I had given up. "Non voglio un debito," I said, my voice raw with a hope I didn't dare feel. "I don't want a debt. Voglio solo che siamo al sicuro." I want us to be safe. "Siete al sicuro," he repeated, his voice gaining a new fierce intensity. "You are safe. Finché sarete sotto il mio tetto, sarete sotto la mia protezione. La tua famiglia, I miei nemici, qui non possono toccarvi." As long as you are under my roof, you are under my protection. Your family, my enemies, they cannot touch you here. He looked from me back to the children, a possessive, determined light igniting in the stormy depths of his eyes. Nessuno ve li porterà mai via. Te lo do la mia parola. No one will ever take them from you. I give you my word. It was a vow. From a man whose word was law, whose promise was more binding than any contract. The terror that had been a constant, gnawing companion for 5 years didn't vanish, but it shifted. It transformed from a free-floating, suffocating panic into a focused, manageable fear. The devil I knew was now our sworn guardian, and as I looked at him, standing watch over my sleeping children in the moonlight, I felt the first, treacherous, and undeniable flicker of something that was not fear. It was the fragile, terrifying beginning of trust. The days that followed were a surreal lesson in adaptation. We were prisoners, yet our cage was a sun-drenched paradise, filled with the scent of lemon trees and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves on the cliffs below. The children, with the boundless resilience of the very young, slowly began to uncoil. The vast, walled gardens became their new, endless kingdom. Marco, his terror forgotten, chased iridescent lizards through the rosemary bushes, his laughter once again a bright, musical sound. Sophia explored with a quiet, methodical curiosity, collecting interesting stones and asking Rosa the names of every flower. Lorenzo was a ghost in his own villa. We would see him a dark silhouette in a distant window, the low murmur of his voice from behind the closed door of his study, the sound of his car arriving or departing. He kept his distance, but his presence was a constant, a gravitational force pulling at the edges of our new world. He was observing us, learning us. I could feel his gaze like a physical touch, and I, in turn, was observing him. I saw the way his men, hard-faced and dangerous, moved with an absolute deference. I saw the quiet, ruthless efficiency with which his empire was run from that secluded study. This was not the chaotic, blustering brutality of my father's world. This was a cold, precise machine, and Lorenzo Conti was its master. One afternoon, I found Sophia in his library, a room I had avoided for its imposing, masculine energy. She was standing on her tiptoes, straining to reach a large, leather-bound book on a high shelf. Before I could step in, a shadow fell over her. Lorenzo. He had entered as silently as a panther. He didn't speak. He reached up, his movements fluid and sure, retrieved the heavy book and handed it to her. It was a beautifully illustrated collection of Sicilian folktales. Sophia looked from the book to his face, her expression solemn. "Grazie," she whispered. "Thank you." He gave a single, slow nod, his stormy gaze unreadable. Then he turned and left without another word. It was a small moment, insignificant to anyone else. But to me, standing frozen in the doorway, it was a seismic shift. He was not just tolerating their presence, he was engaging with it. He was seeing them as people. That evening, Rosa brought our dinner to the small table in our private sitting room. But the routine was different. Don Conti richiede la vostra presenza per cena, nella sala da pranzo principale, she said, her tone making it clear this was not a request I could refuse. Don Conti requests your presence for dinner in the main dining room. My heart stuttered. A formal dinner. With him. What did he want now? I dressed the children and myself in the new clothes provided, a simple but elegant linen dress for me, and tiny, perfect replicas of casual wear for Sophia and Marco. We were led to a dining room that could have hosted a small army. A long, ancient table of dark wood gleamed under a massive iron chandelier. Lorenzo was already there, standing at the head of the table. He looked every inch the Don, dressed in a dark, open-collared shirt, but his posture was less rigid than usual. He pulled out the chair to my right. The children were seated opposite, on polished wooden booster seats that had magically appeared. The meal was a quiet, awkward affair at first. The children were shy, eating with a concentration that was comical in its intensity. Lorenzo didn't try to force conversation. He watched, his gaze moving from Marco, who was meticulously separating his peas from his risotto, to Sophia, who was watching him with that same unnerving, analytical focus. It was Sophia who broke the silence. She pointed her small fork at him. Abiti qui tutto da solo? Do you live here all alone? Lorenzo set down his wineglass. Si, he said. Yes. È una casa molto grande per una persona, she observed, her tone matter-of-fact. It is a huge house for one person. Lo è, he agreed, a flicker of something amusement in his eyes. È troppo silenziosa. It is. It is too quiet. Marco looked up, a smear of food on his cheek. Io non sono silenzioso. La mamma dice che sono rumoroso. I'm not quiet. Mama says I'm loud. A sound, rough and unfamiliar, escaped Lorenzo. It took me a moment to realize it was a laugh. A real, genuine, unguarded laugh. It transformed his entire face, smoothing the harsh lines, making him look years younger and devastatingly handsome. My breath caught in my throat. He was beautiful. Posso vederlo, he said to Marco, his voice warm with that lingering laughter. I can see that. E di cosa ti piace fare rumore? And what do you like to be loud about? The dam broke. Marco launched into an enthusiastic, jumbled story about the lizard in the garden, about the big black car, about the Signora Gentile, who brought them cookies. Sophia, emboldened, began to ask questions about the grim-looking portraits on the walls. Lorenzo answered them patiently, seriously, as if he were addressing a board of directors. He didn't dumb it down for them. He told Sophia the subject's name, their relation, and the history they represented. She listened, rapt. I sat there, watching this impossible scene unfold. The ruthless Mafia boss was being charmed, disarmed, and utterly captivated by my 5-year-old twins. He was seeing the life, the noise, the chaotic, messy joy that had been absent from his sterile fortress. He was seeing a family, and I saw the hunger in his eyes. A deep, profound loneliness that all his power and wealth could not fill. When the meal was over, Rosa came to take the children to get ready for bed. Lorenzo and I were left alone at the massive table. The silence now was different, thick, charged. He swirled the dark red wine in his glass. Sono straordinari, he said quietly. They are remarkable. Sono la mia vita, I replied, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. They are my life. He looked at me, and the storm in his eyes had calmed to a still, intense sea. Hai fatto una cosa incredibile, Chiara. Crescerli da sola. Tenerli al sicuro. Tenerli così pieni di luz. You have done an incredible thing, Chiara. Raising them alone. Keeping them safe. Keeping them so full of light. He paused, choosing his words with a care that touched me deeply. Questa casa è stata una tomba per molto tempo. La loro risata è un suono che non sapevo mi mancasse. This house has been a tomb for a long time. Their laughter, it is a sound I did not know I was missing. He stood and came to my side of the table, offering me his hand. I took it, his skin warm and sure against mine. He didn't let go. He led me out onto the terrace, where the night was warm and scented with jasmine and the sea. The moon was high, casting the world in a silvery, magical light. Ho preso una decisione, he said, his voice low and certain. I have made a decision. Non puoi tornare alla tua vecchia vita. È finita. I rossi ti staranno cercando. Il tuo segreto è stato scoperto. You cannot go back to your old life. It is over. The Rossis will be looking for you now. Your secret is out. My heart sank, a cold stone in my chest. Quindi, cosa si succederà? So, what happens to us? He turned to face me, his hands coming up to cradle my face. The touch was shockingly gentle, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. Tu resti, he said, his gaze burning into mine, willing me to believe him. Resti qui, con me, non com prigionieri. Come la mia famiglia. You stay here. With me, not as prisoners, as my family. The word hung in the air between us, immense and terrifying. Non si tratta più del debito, Chiara. Si tratta del silenzio in questa casa. I delle duvosine che lo hanno riempito. This is not about the dead anymore, Chiara. This is about the silence in this house. and the two small voices that have filled it. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. His breath was warm on my skin. Lascia che ti protega. Lascia che sia io il muro tra te e il mondo. Lascia che io sia il loro padre. Let me protect you. Let me be the wall between you and the world. Let me be their father. I stared at him, my mind reeling, my heart a wild, frantic thing in my chest. It was wild. It was impossible. It was the most terrifying proposition I had ever heard, but as I looked into his eyes, I saw the raw, unvarnished truth. He wasn't just offering us protection. He was offering us a future. A dangerous, complicated, unimaginable future. But a future nonetheless. A future with him. And in that moment, with the scent of jasmine in the air, and the memory of his laughter at the dinner table echoing in my soul, the last of my resistance crumbled. I leaned into his touch, into the solid, sure promise of him. See, I whispered, the word a surrender and a beginning all at once. Yes. And for the first time in 5 years, the word felt not like a sentence, but like a key. The word see was not an end, but a detonation. It shattered the remaining walls between our worlds, not with violence, but with the quiet, seismic force of a shared future. The villa, once a beautiful prison, began a slow, miraculous transformation. It was no longer just his fortress, it was becoming our home. The children's presence, once a contained anomaly, now seeped into every corner. A brightly colored wooden train appeared under the grand piano in the living room. A picture book about sea creatures was left open on a low leather ottoman. A small, lumpy clay bowl Marco made at the local artisan's workshop held a place of honor on the massive dining table. Lorenzo didn't just permit it. He seemed to cultivate it. He was a man of his word, building the family he had claimed with a terrifying, focused intensity. He was not a natural with children. His movements were too deliberate, his voice sometimes too gruff, but he was a fast, astonishingly dedicated learner. He learned that Marco needed a specific, ridiculous goodnight ritual, involving 3 kisses, a story about a brave mouse, and the blanket tucked in just so. He learned that Sophia, while she loved his serious answers, also secretly adored being swung high into the air until she shrieked with laughter. He was patient, he was present, and he was, to my continual astonishment, deeply, genuinely kind. Our own relationship unfolded in the quiet spaces between his duties and the children's needs. It was a slow, cautious, breathtaking dance. We talked for hours on the terrace after the children were asleep, the stars a brilliant blanket above us. He told me about the immense, lonely weight of his legacy, the constant vigilance that was as natural to him as breathing, the sacrifices he'd made long before he ever knew what he was sacrificing for. I told him about the bone-deep fear of those 5 years, the constant looking over my shoulder, the sheer exhaustion of being the only pillar holding up our small, trembling world. We were 2 halves of a whole, broken by different versions of the same violent inheritance, finding a strange, perfect, and terrifying fit. One evening, he didn't come to the terrace. A faint sense of unease led me to the children's room. I found him there, sitting in the dim glow of a nightlight, simply watching them sleep. He looked up as I entered, his expression raw and unguarded in the soft light. Non mi sono mai permesso di volere tutto questo, he confessed, his voice a rough whisper. I never allowed myself to want this. Una famiglia è la vulnerabilità suprema. I miei nemici la vedrebbero come un'arma. A family. It is the ultimate vulnerability. My enemies would see it as a weapon. Siamo un'arma? I asked, my heart in my throat. Are we a weapon? He stood and came to me, his hands framing my face, his touch both possessive and reverent. No, he said, his gaze burning with a fierce, protective light. Sei la mia forza. Loro sono la mia ragione. Per la prima volta, non combatto solo per mantenere un territorio. Combatto per un futuro. Il nostro futuro. No, you are my strength. They are my reason. For the first time, I am not just fighting to hold territory. I am fighting for a future. Our future. He kissed me then, and it was nothing like the first desperate kiss in the garden, or the tender one on the terrace. This was a vow. A promise sealed in the dark, surrounded by the soft sounds of our sleeping children. It was the beginning of everything. The outside world, with all its dangers, did not disappear. Lorenzo's Cold War with my family intensified. He used the knowledge I provided, their patterns, their weaknesses, the secret fears I knew so well, to dismantle their operations systematically. It was a brutal, silent conflict, fought in boardrooms and on docksides, a chess game played with human lives. But he never brought that violence home. He never let the shadow of it touch the children. Our home was a sanctuary, a bubble of impossible normality. A year passed. The change in the children was profound. They thrived under the stability, the love, the sheer, unshakable security Lorenzo provided. Marco's laughter was a constant, joyful soundtrack to our days. Sophia's quiet intelligence was nurtured and challenged. She followed Lorenzo around like a tiny, serious shadow, absorbing his world with a frightening acuity. They called him Papa Lorenzo. The title, once so impossible, now felt as natural and essential as the air we breathed. On the anniversary of the day he brought us to the villa, he took me to the cliff's edge behind the property, the same spot where we had first truly spoken. The sun was setting, a blazing orb of orange and fire sinking into the wine-dark sea, painting the sky in a masterpiece of color. He took my hands in his grip strong and sure. "Chiara," he began, his voice steady but filled with a depth of emotion that made my eyes sting. "Mi hai ridato la vita 2 volte. La prima con il tuo coraggio 5 anni fa, e poi de nuovo portando la tua luce nella mia oscurità. You gave me back my life twice. First with your courage 5 years ago, and then again by bringing your light into my darkness." He dropped to one knee on the soft grass. My breath hitched, the world narrowing to this man, this moment. He pulled a small, black velvet box from his pocket. Inside, nestled against the silk, was a ring. A central diamond, brilliant and clear, was flanked by 2 smaller, perfect emeralds. "Per Sofia e Marco," he said softly, his gaze holding mine, baring his soul. "For Sofia and Marco, e per te, il centro del nostro mondo, la donna che mi ha salvato, che si è fidata di me, che mi ha insegnato ad amare. And for you, the center of our world, the woman who saved me, who trusted me, who taught me how to love." He took a deep breath. The Don, the king, was brought to his knees not by an enemy, but by love. "Sposami. Rendi ufficiale questa famiglia. Permettimi di passare il resto della mia vita ad essere il marito che meriti il padre di cui hanno bisogno. Marry me. Make this family official. Let me spend the rest of my life being the husband you deserve and the father they need." I looked at the ring, a perfect, glittering symbol of the beautiful, impossible life we had built from the ashes of fear and betrayal. I looked at this man, my enemy turned protector, turned partner, turned love of my life. There were no more shadows between us, no more secrets, just this brilliant, certain future. "See," I said, my voice strong and clear, tears of pure, unadulterated joy streaming down my face. "See, Lorenzo, sempre. Yes, Lorenzo, always." He slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit, a cool, heavy band of promise. As he stood to kiss me, the sound of delighted laughter made us turn. Sofia and Marco were running toward us across the grass, having escaped Rosa's watchful eye. They crashed into us, wrapping their small, strong arms around our legs, completing the circle, cementing our vow. Lorenzo lifted Marco onto his shoulders and took Sofia's hand, his other arm pulling me tight against his side. We stood there, the 4 of us, a family forged in secrets and saved by a love that was as dangerous and profound as the sea below, watching the sun finally dip below the horizon, setting the sky on fire. The girl who had hidden in the shadows was gone. In her place stood a woman loved by a king, a mother to his heirs, the heart of his empire. I had hidden my twins for 5 years to keep them safe. I never imagined that safety would taste of salt, air, and laughter, or that it would look like forever, here, with him. The engagement ring was more than jewelry. It was a coronation. It transformed my standing within the villa from that of a protected guest to its future queen. The staff's deference became laced with a new, genuine warmth. Luca, the granite-faced capo, now offered me a slight, almost imperceptible smile when I passed. I was no longer Don Conti's complication. I was his chosen consort. The children felt the shift, too. They wore the new reality like a favorite blanket, secure in the knowledge that Papa Lorenzo was now a permanent, unshakable fixture. Our days settled into a rich, vibrant rhythm. Mornings were a cheerful chaos of breakfasts where Marco would enthusiastically recount his dreams, and Sofia would quiz Lorenzo on everything from the migration patterns of birds to the inner workings of the espresso machine. He answered her with a patience that never failed to astonish me, treating her boundless curiosity with the same seriousness he afforded his most trusted advisors. Afternoons were for lessons. I taught them their numbers and letters, while Lorenzo, in his own way, began their education in his world. He taught them the names of the garden's flowers, the history of the local ruins, and how to tell if a fish was fresh. He was preparing them, not for a life of violence, but to be stewards of this land, this legacy. It was a future I had never dared to imagine for them. My own role evolved. I was still his confidant, the calm voice in the storm of his business, but now I was also his partner in planning the future of his legitimate enterprises. We spent hours in his study, the door open to the sound of the children playing in the hall, discussing investments, charitable foundations, and ways to further distance his empire from the shadowy roots of his father's generation. He was building a kingdom worthy of his heirs, but the past was a patient hunter. It struck on a day that had begun with perfect, sun-drenched normality. We had taken the children to a secluded cove for a picnic. Marco was splashing in the shallow turquoise water, Sofia was building an elaborate sandcastle, and Lorenzo and I were lying on a blanket, his hand resting on my bare back. Our conversation a lazy, contented murmur. The sharp crack of a rifle shot shattered the peace. It wasn't aimed at us. It was a warning shot, kicking up sand 50 feet to our left. In an instant, the world exploded into a nightmare of controlled violence. Lorenzo was on his feet, his body a shield in front of me and the children. A gun I hadn't seen him draw now held low at his side. Luca and 2 other men materialized from the rocks, their own weapons drawn, forming a protective cordon around us. "Get the children to the car," Lorenzo commanded, his voice a whip crack of absolute authority, his eyes scanning the cliffs above. Now, there was no panic, only a terrifying, efficient purpose. I scooped up a crying Marco, grabbed Sofia's hand, and we ran, crouched low, toward the black SUVs parked on the cliff road. As we ran, I heard the distinct, suppressed pops of return fire from Lorenzo's men. We were shoved into a vehicle, Luca slamming the door behind us. "Go!" he barked at the driver. As we sped away, I looked back through the tinted window. Lorenzo was still standing on the beach, a solitary, defiant figure amidst the chaos, ensuring our escape. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't run. He had stood his ground, a king defending his family. The children were hysterical. Marco was sobbing uncontrollably, and Sofia was shaking, her face pale with a terror she was too young to process. I held them tight, my own heart hammering, whispering reassurances I didn't feel. We were rushed back to the villa, the gates slamming shut behind us like the jaws of a trap. The compound went into a lockdown I had only heard about. Armed men patrolled the walls. The atmosphere was thick with a tension I could taste. It was hours before Lorenzo returned. He walked into the living room where I was still clutching the children, his clothes dusty, a thin cut on his cheekbone, but otherwise unharmed. His eyes went immediately to us, scanning us for injury. Seeing we were physically whole, the rigid set of his shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Rossi," he said, the single word dripping with cold fury. "A small, stupid faction that still answers to your brother, Enzo. They thought to send a message. He came to us, kneeling so he was at eye level with the children. He didn't offer them empty platitudes. He looked at them, his gaze steady and honest. Mi dispiace che abbiate avuto paura, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I am sorry you were frightened. E volte, gli uomini cattivi provano, e fer del male persone che amo. Ma io non lo permetterò, mai. Sometimes, bad men try to hurt the people I love. But I will not allow it, never. He looked at Sofia. Sei stata coraggiosa. You were brave. He looked at Marco. E anche tu. And you were, too. He then turned his gaze to me, and in his eyes, I saw the storm not of anger, but of a ferocious, protective love that shook me to my core. The attack, instead of driving us apart, fused us with the heat of shared terror and survival. That night, after the children had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, we stood on the terrace. The moon was hidden behind clouds, the world dark and watchful. This changes nothing, I said, my voice quiet but unwavering in the darkness. It changes everything, he countered, turning to face me. It proves that our future will not be given to us. We will have to fight for it. Every day. He pulled me into his arms, his embrace a fortress. And we will, together. The following weeks were a period of grim consolidation. Lorenzo's retaliation was swift and absolute. The rogue Rossi faction was erased, their operations dismantled, their allies warned. It was a message that echoed through the underworld. The Conti family was not just strong, it was untouchable. Its heart was now protected by a love that would burn anyone who threatened it to the ground. In the quiet that followed the storm, our bond deepened into something unbreakable. We were no longer just a man and a woman in love. We were partners in a war, architects of a dynasty, two souls who had stared into the abyss together and chosen to build a future on its very edge. The fear was still there, a cold, familiar companion. But it was now outweighed by a fiercer love, a brighter hope, and a certainty that, whatever came next, we would face it as one. The aftermath of the beach attack settled not into fear, but into a new, steely resolve. The villa was no longer just a home, it was a command center, its security refined to an art form. Lorenzo's war with the remnants of my family became his sole, consuming focus, but he waged it with a chilling precision that kept the violence far from our door. He was not just defending his territory, he was pruning a diseased branch from our family tree, ensuring no shadow would ever fall on Sofia and Marco again. I became more than his confidant. I became his strategist. My knowledge of the Rossi psyche, its secret shames, and hidden weaknesses became a key weapon. I didn't just provide financial data. I helped profile his targets, predicting their reactions and finding the psychological levers brute force could not. We were a perfect, terrifying partnership, his ruthlessness and my insight. Our love, forged in that crucible of danger, became the bedrock of everything. The children, shielded from the worst of it, continued to blossom. Marco's sunny disposition returned, though he now sometimes checked the sky with a thoughtful frown when a helicopter passed overhead. Sofia, however, seemed to absorb the tension, her watchful eyes missing nothing. She began to ask Lorenzo quieter, more pointed questions about the bad men, and he, respecting her fierce intelligence, gave her honest, age-appropriate answers about loyalty and consequence. He was raising a princess who understood the weight of the crown. 6 months after the attack, on a night so clear the Milky Way shimmered across the sky, Lorenzo took me to the ruins of an ancient Greek temple on his property. The moon illuminated the broken columns, casting long, dramatic shadows. It was a place of ghosts and gods, and it felt like the right place for what was to come. "It is done," he said, his voice quiet but ringing with finality in the sacred silence. "Enzo is fleeing to South America. The last of his loyalists have been neutralized. The Rossi threat is over." The words should have brought elation. Instead, they brought a profound, quiet stillness. The specter that had haunted me for 5 years, the reason for my running, for my hiding, was gone, extinguished by the man standing beside me. I looked at him, this man who had avenged me, protected me, loved me. "Thank you," I whispered, the words inadequate for the debt I felt. He shook his head, turning to face me. "Do not thank me for removing a stain from our future." He took my hands. "Chiara, these past months, they have been the most brutal and the most beautiful of my life, because of you. Because of them." He took a deep breath, his stormy eyes holding mine with an intensity that made the world fall away. "I do not want to wait any longer. I want you to be my wife. Not in a year, Not in 6 months. Now. My heart swelled, too full for words. I could only nod, tears of joy and relief streaming down my face. He didn't have a ring. The one he'd given me was promise enough. This was about the vow. He pulled me into his arms and kissed me under the starlight and the gaze of ancient stones, and it felt like a ceremony more binding than any a priest could perform. We were married 2 weeks later in the small, centuries-old chapel in the village. It was not the large, society wedding a man of his stature could have commanded. It was quiet, intimate, and fiercely protected. Sophia was my flower girl, scattering rose petals with a solemn dignity that made my heart ache with love. Marco, as ring-bearer, nearly dropped the pillow twice, his grin infectious. My mother was there, radiant and healthy, still blissfully unaware of the true nature of the man she now called her son-in-law, knowing only that he had saved her daughter and given her a beautiful life. As I walked down the short aisle on the arm of the village mayor, I saw only Lorenzo. He stood at the altar, his gaze fixed on me, and in his eyes, I saw the storm finally, completely, at peace. He was home, and I was his. The priest pronounced us man and wife. When Lorenzo lifted my veil, his kiss was not one of passion, but of profound, soul-deep possession and commitment. A cheer went up from the small gathering of his most trusted men and the villagers who had become our friends. We were no longer Don Conti and the runaway Rossi daughter. We were Lorenzo and Chiara Conti, a family. The reception was held in the villa's gardens, a vibrant, joyful celebration under strings of fairy lights. There was music, laughter, and the smell of roasting meat and jasmine. For the first time, the villa felt truly, completely alive. I watched Lorenzo dance with Sophia, her small feet on his shiny shoes, her head resting against his chest. I watched him lift a shrieking, laughing Marco high into the air. This was the life I had saved him for. This was the future I had unknowingly secured that night I fled my father's house. Later, as the party wound down, he found me by the fountain, watching the water dance in the moonlight. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his solid strength. "Are you happy, Mia Regina?" he murmured into my hair. "My queen." I leaned back into him, covering his hands with mine. "I am complete," I whispered. And I was. The girl who had hidden her twins was gone. The woman who stood in her place was a wife, a mother, a partner in every sense of the word. She was loved, she was safe, and she was, finally, home. The past was a closed book. The future was a blank page, and we would write it together. The first year of our marriage was not a calm sea after the storm, but a purposeful, powerful voyage into a shared future. The title, Signora Conti, was not just a name, it was a mantle I wore with a quiet, fierce pride. I learned the intricate rhythms of Lorenzo's world not as an outsider, but as its co-regent. I sat beside him in meetings with legitimate business partners, my presence a silent signal that the Conti empire was evolving, its foundation shifting from pure fear to a more complex, formidable blend of respect and strategic power. My opinion was not just valued, it was sought. The children remained the vibrant, beating heart of our home. Marco started school in the village, his boundless energy and easy smile making him instantly popular. Sophia, more reserved, became her teacher's star pupil, her sharp mind devouring knowledge. In the evenings, our dinner table was a lively hub of their stories, their questions, and their laughter. Lorenzo, who had once dined in solitary silence, now presided over this beautiful chaos with a look of profound contentment I doubted he ever thought he'd wear. He was a father in every sense that mattered. He helped with homework, soothed nightmares, and taught Marco how to kick a soccer ball with a focus usually reserved for corporate takeovers. He listened to Sophia's intricate theories about the stars with the same gravity he gave his capos. He was building memories, a childhood for them that was the absolute inverse of his own. Our love, too, deepened in the rich soil of this shared life. It was no longer just the desperate, passionate flame born of danger and discovery. It became something steadier, warmer, a deep, abiding current that ran beneath the surface of our days. It was in the way his hand would find the small of my back as we walked through the gardens, The way he'd leave a fresh cup of coffee on my desk when I was working. The way his eyes would meet mine across a crowded room. A silent conversation passing between us. We were partners in every conceivable way. On the anniversary of our wedding, he surprised me. He'd had the ruined Greek temple partially restored. Not to its former glory, but just enough to make it safe, to clear the space around it and install subtle lighting that made the ancient stones glow against the night sky. A single, beautifully set table for two stood amidst the pillars, overlooking the sea. A proper celebration, he said, pulling out my chair, for the year that made all the others worth surviving. We ate and talked, not of business or threats, but of dreams. His dream is to turn more of his enterprises fully legitimate. My dream of starting a foundation to help women and children trapped in the world I had escaped. Our dreams were intertwining, becoming a single vision for our family's legacy. As dessert was served, a familiar, sleek black sedan pulled up at a respectful distance down the path. Luca got out, but he wasn't alone. He was leading a small, nervous-looking man in a rumpled suit. My breath caught. I recognized him. Aldo, one of my father's old, mid-level accountants, was always kind to me as a child. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but his eyes became the cold, flat gray of a winter sea. "It seems we have a guest," he said calmly, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Aldo was brought before our table, trembling. "Don Conti, Signora, I come with a message. From your brother, Enzo." My blood ran cold. "I thought he was gone, fled. He is dying," Aldo stammered, his eyes darting between us. "Lung cancer. The doctors give him weeks." The news was a punch to the gut. Enzo. My brother. The one who had so casually discussed murdering the man who was now my husband. There was no love lost between us. But he was blood. He asks, he begs, for your forgiveness. And he asks to see his niece and nephews. Just once. Before he dies. The air grew thick and heavy. I looked at Lorenzo. His face was a mask of granite. The request was an obscenity. After everything, after the hunting, the attack on the beach, the years of fear, to ask to lay his eyes on my children. "No," Lorenzo said. The single word, absolute, final, and colder than ice. "The answer is no." Aldo flinched, nodding rapidly. "I understand, Don Conti. I will tell him." "You will tell him this," Lorenzo said, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "He will die alone, as he lived. He will never speak their names. He will never look upon their faces. The Rossi line ends with him, in the shame and failure he earned. That is my message." Aldo practically bowed, backing away before turning and scurrying back to the car. The silence he left behind was deafening. I stared at Lorenzo, my emotions a tangled knot of residual fear, relief, and a strange, painful pang of pity for the brother I had once known. Lorenzo reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch was warm, pulling me back from the past. "I will not let his poison touch them, not even with his last, dying breath," he said, his voice firm but now laced with the protective warmth I knew so well. "They are Contis. Their legacy is one we are building, not one he destroyed." He was right. Of course, he was right. But in that moment, surrounded by the ancient, enduring stones, I felt the final, ghostly thread connecting me to my old life severed. There was no going back. No forgiveness. Only forward. Our future. I turned my hand over, lacing my fingers with his. "They are Contis," I agreed, my voice steady. "And we are their legacy." He stood, pulling me to my feet and into his arms. We stood there, holding each other in the heart of the restored ruin, the past finally, truly dead and buried behind us. The ghosts were gone. Only we remained, a king and his queen, ready to face whatever the future held, together. The news of Enzo's impending death was not a closure, but a final, grim punctuation mark on a chapter we had already burned. We heard nothing more. A month later, a brief, untraceable message reached Lorenzo through a secure channel. It was done. The last direct heir to the Rossi empire was gone. There was nobody to claim, no funeral to attend. He had ceased to exist, as I had 5 years earlier. The silence that followed was different from any that had come before. It was not the tense quiet of hiding, nor the charged stillness before a storm. It was a deep, profound, and peaceful silence. The last shadow had lifted. The children, blessedly unaware of the specifics, seemed to sense the shift. An unnameable weight lifted from the villa, allowing joy to expand, to fill every room without reservation. Marco's laughter echoed a little louder. Sophia's smiles came a little easier. Lorenzo, too, was transformed. The constant, low-grade vigilance that had been a part of his essence since boyhood began to ease. He laughed more freely, his smiles lasting longer, the lines on his face softening from marks of stress to signs of a life well lived. He was no longer just a don protecting his assets. He was a man enjoying his family. Our work on the foundation began in earnest. We called it Il Porto Sicuro, the safe harbor. Using a significant portion of his laundered capital, now fully cleansed and invested legitimately, we created a network of shelters and support programs for women and children fleeing violence and exploitation, the very kind of life I had escaped. It was my vision, but he was its engine, his strategic mind and vast resources turning my dream into a tangible force for good. It became our shared passion, a redemption song for both our pasts. One afternoon, I was in my office at the villa, reviewing architectural plans for a new shelter in Naples, when Sophia came in. She was now 7, her serious nature tempered by the security she'd known for 2 years. She climbed into the chair opposite my desk, a miniature executive. "Mama," she began, her tone thoughtful. "Papa Lorenzo's work. It's different from yours, isn't it?" The question was a carefully placed probe. She was old enough to notice the men who came and went, the quiet conversations, the unspoken authority her father wielded. I set down my pen, choosing my words with care. "There are many kinds of work, amor mio. My work is to help people who are scared and have nowhere to go. Your father's work, his most important work, is to make sure that no one can ever scare us, or take away our home. He builds powerful walls to keep our family safe." She considered this, her dark eyes, so like mine, seeing too much. "So, he fights the bad men?" "Yes," I said, honestly. "So, we don't have to." She nodded, a look of satisfaction on her face. "He's very good at it." Then she hopped down. "I'm going to help Marco build a fort." I watched her go, my heart full. She understood in her own way. She saw her father not as a monster, but as a protector. And he was. He was the fiercest protector any of us could have ever hoped for. That evening, I found Lorenzo in his study, but he wasn't working. He was standing at the window, watching Sophia and Marco in the garden below, trying to drag a large fallen olive branch to build this fort. A soft smile played on his lips. "She asked me about your work today," I said, coming to stand beside him. He didn't look away from the window. "And what did you tell her?" "That you build strong walls to keep us safe." He was silent for a moment. Then he slid his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "That is the only work that matters now," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything else is just a means to that end." He turned to me then, his gaze intense. "We have a meeting in New York next week. For the foundation. Please come with me. I want us to stand together, in the light, as who we are." It was a significant step. A public declaration of our partnership, not just in our private world, but on a global stage. "And the children?" "They come with us," he said firmly. "This is their legacy too. They should see it." The trip was a whirlwind. New York was a shock of noise and light after our secluded Sicilian life. But Lorenzo was in his element, a different kind of king in this concrete jungle. In the boardrooms of philanthropists and the halls of charities, he was Don Conti, a powerful, legitimate benefactor. And by his side, I was Chiara Conti, his wife, his partner, the driving heart of Il Porto Sicuro. We were a formidable team. On our last night, we stood on the terrace of our penthouse suite, the glittering skyline of Manhattan spread out before us. It was a world away from our cliffside villa, yet it felt like another territory in the kingdom we were building together. Sophia and Marco were asleep inside, exhausted and exhilarated by the adventure. We could have a life here, part of the time. Lorenzo said, his arm around me. The Foundation's headquarters should be here. It's the center of the world. I leaned my head against his shoulder. Our center is wherever you and the children are, I replied. But yes, we can have both, the quiet of home and the noise of the world. We don't have to hide from either anymore. He turned me in his arms, his face illuminated by the city lights. We have everything, Chiara. Everything I never knew I wanted. He kissed me, and it tasted of the future, a future without limits, without shadows. A future we had wrested from the jaws of a violent past and made entirely, beautifully, our own. We had gone from a desperate knock on a door to commanding the attention of the world, and we had done it together. The New York trip was a catalyst. It flung open the doors to a world I had only ever observed from the periphery. The success of Il Porto Sicuro was immediate and profound. Our story, the reclusive Italian billionaire and his wife, a former victim of the very violence they now fought, was a powerful narrative that opened wallets and doors. We were featured in glossy magazines, not in the crime sections, but in the society and philanthropy pages. Lorenzo Conti was no longer just a whispered name. He was a public figure of influence, and, to the world's astonishment, a devoted family man. We maintained our home in Sicily as our sanctuary, our true north. But we now split our time between the cliffside villa and a stunning penthouse overlooking Central Park. The children adapted with remarkable flexibility. Marco became a minor celebrity at his New York private school, his cheerful confidence and exotic accent making him instantly popular. Sophia, more introverted, found her tribe in the library and the science labs, her intellect nurtured by some of the world's best minds. Lorenzo thrived in this new, dual existence. In Sicily, he was the Don, the patriarch, the landowner whose word was law. In New York, he was the visionary CEO, the philanthropist, the man who commanded boardrooms with the same effortless authority he wielded over his men. And through it all, he was a present, doting father. He never missed a school play, a parent-teacher conference, or a Saturday morning soccer game. He was building a legacy of love, not just of power. On the twins' 8th birthday, we threw a party in our New York apartment. It was a chaotic, joyful affair, filled with a dozen children from their school, the air buzzing with laughter and the sound of tearing wrapping paper. Lorenzo, who had once presided over a silent, intimidating dinner table, was now on his hands and knees, helping a group of kids assemble a complicated Lego spaceship, his brow furrowed in concentration. I watched him from across the room, my heart so full I thought it might burst. This was the man I had saved. This was the father I had given my children. This was the love of my life. Later, after the last guest had left, and the children were tucked into bed, exhausted and happy, we stood on the terrace. The city's lights twinkled below, an artificial constellation. Do you ever think about it? I asked softly, leaning against the railing. The bathroom? The briefcase? He came to stand beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. Every day, he said, his voice quiet, not with regret, with awe, at the randomness of it. It took courage for you to do the right thing when everything in your life was pushing you to do the wrong one. He turned to me, his face etched with a love so deep it was humbling. You didn't just save my life that day, Chiara. You saved my soul. You walked into my darkness, and you turned on a light. You and those 2 incredible children. He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. You are my miracle. Tears welled in my eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. We saved each other, I whispered. He kissed me then, a slow, tender kiss that held the weight of our entire journey, the fear, the danger, the passion, the peace. It was a kiss that promised 1,000 more tomorrows, each one brighter than the last. A few months later, we were back in Sicily for the summer. The children were racing through the gardens, their tanned limbs flashing in the sun, their Italian flowing as freely as their English. Lorenzo and I were walking hand in hand through the lemon grove, the air thick with the citrus scent. I have a surprise for you, he said, a boyish grin on his face that I saw more and more often these days. He led me to the cliff's edge, to our spot, but something was different. A small, elegant stone bench had been placed there, carved with a single word, sempre, always. And next to it, a young olive tree had been planted, its leaves silvery in the sunlight. For our family, he said, a tree to grow with us, to put down roots, here, where it all began. I looked from the tree to the bench, to the man beside me, my vision blurring with tears of joy. This was it. This was the life I had dreamed of in my darkest moments. This was the safety I had fought for. It wasn't just the absence of danger, it was the presence of this profound, abiding love. That night, as we lay in our bed, the windows open to the sound of the sea, I thought of the terrified young woman I had been, hiding her children, jumping at every shadow. I thought of the desperate gamble I had taken, trusting the most dangerous man I had ever met. I thought of the battles we had fought, side by side, and the future we had built from the ashes of our pasts. Lorenzo's arm was draped over me, his breathing slow and even in sleep. I nestled closer, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart against my back. The girl who had hidden her twins was a ghost, a memory. The woman in this bed was a wife, a mother, a force. A king loved her, and she ruled by his side. She had not just found safety, she had built a kingdom. And as I drifted to sleep, the scent of the sea and the sound of my husband's heart was my lullaby. I knew with absolute certainty that our story was only just beginning. The best was yet to come. The years continued to unfold, not as a straight line, but as a beautiful, expanding spiral, each loop building upon the last, richer and more secure. Sophia, at 16, was a force of nature, her mother's fierce heart housed in her father's strategic mind. She spent her summers interning at Il Porto Sicuro's New York headquarters, and her insights into the psychology of the women we helped often surpassed those of our seasoned staff. She had Lorenzo's cool authority and my stubborn compassion, a combination that left no doubt she would one day command the entire Conti empire, both its philanthropic and its business arms. Marco, at 14, was all sunshine and easy charm, a talented artist who saw the world in colors and shapes, his laughter still the sound that could lift any mood in the house. He was the heart, Sophia the mind, and together, they were the perfect embodiment of the world we had built, from love, not fear. Our foundation had grown beyond anything I could have imagined, a global network of safe houses and advocacy programs. It was our life's work, our shared redemption. Lorenzo had slowly, methodically, disentangled himself from the last vestiges of his father's world. The Conti name was now synonymous with legitimate enterprise and powerful philanthropy. The man who had once tested a waitress with a briefcase of cash now testified before congressional committees on human trafficking. The transformation was complete. On a bright Sicilian morning, the air warm and sweet with the scent of orange blossoms, we stood as a family at the cliff's edge, by the olive tree Lorenzo had planted years ago. It was now strong and sturdy, its branches offering dappled shade over the stone bench engraved with sempre. We were celebrating Sophia's acceptance to Harvard to study law and international relations. To change the system from within, she'd stated, her gaze as steady and sure as her father's. Lorenzo put his arm around her shoulders, his pride a tangible force. They will not know what hit them, he said, a proud, predatory grin on his face. I looked at my family, my brilliant daughter, my joyful son, and my husband, the man who had once been a storm and was now my anchor. The journey flooded back to me, not as a painful memory, but as the foundation of everything we were. The terror of the grocery shop, the gut-wrenching decision to hand over the briefcase, the terrifying car ride to this very villa, the slow, miraculous unfurling of trust and love. It had all led here. To this perfect, sun-drenched moment. Later that evening, after the children had gone to their rooms, Lorenzo and I sat on our bench, watching the moon rise over the sea, its silver path a bridge to the horizon. He took my hand, his fingers, once instruments of violence, now lacing with mine with a gentle familiarity that still made my heart skip a beat. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" he asked quietly. "If you had taken the money?" I leaned my head against his shoulder, the solid, familiar bulk of him my forever sanctuary. "Every day," I confessed. "I would have paid the bills. I might have even gone back to school, but I would have spent my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I would have been rich, but I would have lived in a prison of my own making. I looked up at him, at the man who was my freedom. Instead, I found you. I found this. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed it. That briefcase was the most important investment I ever made. It brought me my life. He stood and pulled me to my feet, leading me to the edge of the cliff. The vast, dark sea stretched out before us, the same sea that had witnessed our beginning. We've built our kingdom, Kiara, he said, his voice strong and clear over the whisper of the waves. We've secured our legacy. The past is gone. There are no more shadows. He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the starlight. There is only us, and our future. Always. He kissed me then, a deep, soul-sealing kiss that held the promise of all the years to come. The girl who had hidden her twins was a distant echo. The woman who stood in her place was a queen, a mother, a warrior, a philanthropist, a wife. She was loved, she was powerful, and she was finally and completely free. The Mafia boss who had heard a single word and seen his entire world shift was now just a man, a husband, a father, his empire no longer defined by fear. Still, by the boundless, enduring power of the family he had chosen, the family he had built with the woman brave enough to hand back his money and, in doing so, claim his heart. Our story had begun with a secret whispered in Italian. It would continue, forever, in the language of a love that had conquered everything.